Thank you for another day of Tuesdays with CKLS. Today, we're lucky enough to have a guest presenter. Steve Andrews works at the Southwest Kansas Library System, and he is housed out of Dodge City. And today, he's going to talk about being safe on the internet and other things related to surfing and safety. So, we're going to pass the torch off to him. If you have any questions during the presentation today, please raise your hand or write your question in the chat, and we will repeat your question for Steve so we can learn all together. And then at the end of our time, I also have an opportunity to turn on your mic and ask a question live as well. If you have a question that you would prefer to be asked privately, send it to one of us, Liz, Patty, Andy, or Gail, and we will ask your question for you. So, Steve, you may take it away.
All righty. So, rules of my presentation: you are free to nap as long as you don't snore, right? Nodding off from time to time is allowed. Sometimes the topics we get into with cybersecurity are a little bit boring, I'll be honest with you. And it's such a broad, topic in general. It's kind of hard to cherry pick sometimes what the best bits are going to be to hand over in a presentation to the audience. So hopefully I've done a good enough job. We'll see at the end. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to do PowerPoint slides, and let me get that going here. All righty. So today's presentation is on cybersecurity and a focus on online safety. So we're going to be covering a few different areas as we progress. The sections that I have in mind for today, let me get to the next slide here. There we go. The sections that we're going to talk about first is going to be the why and the where. We're going to talk about, why is it that we're so focused on cybersecurity, especially in relation to online safety and browsing the internet? Obviously, there's a lot that we have to worry about these days. Exposure to, or the risk of data loss and theft and reputational damage, financial loss. And then a slightly newer concern these days is that we can become the unwilling participants in a cyber crime. Now, this is especially true with home equipment. So the presentation is going to be kind of a mix of things that you can take, into account for work and for home, and hopefully pass along to patrons if you have those conversations. The next section, we're going to look at what we like to term the onion model of cybersecurity. What we can do, with our equipment and our software, our applications, our online habits and things like that. And then the last section, we're going to look at the human element, how we might go about recognizing the dangers of things like social engineering, kind of wrapping our heads around how that works. Social engineering is a very big aspect of online safety and cybersecurity. It involves more the cognitive biases and things like that. So this is a quote from Bruce Schneier, or Schneer, depending on how you pronounce it. He has a website. He's a well-known security analyst and IT professional. He said that I am regularly asked what average internet users can do to ensure their safety. My first answer usually is nothing, you're screwed. Well, this was back in 2004, and unfortunately, the landscape, cybersecurity landscape and online safety hasn't improved very much. I mean, we've got newer technology, but, at the same time, the risk of hacks and things like that, social engineering, have gone up. But I don't think that's necessarily true that, only if you do nothing. If you do nothing whatsoever to try to protect your, yourself, your data, your digital footprint, as it were, then yeah, you're definitely in trouble. But we can take some steps to mitigate and reduce the chance, reduce the risks. So again, why does this all matter? Well, we're protecting our personal data. We're trying to limit our digital footprint, as it were, online. We might be protecting organizational data, trying to prevent financial loss. Obviously, that's a big one these days. Reputational damage, usually for larger organizations or companies, but for personal reputation, that can be damaged potentially. We don't want to lose our data through things like ransomware. And we also do not want to be an unwitting accomplice to a cybercrime. And that comes about in the form of what we call botnets, which we'll go into in more detail later in the slides. So the big category to start with is going to be personally identifiable information. And this is a concern not only of us as individuals, but also as organizations. We define that as any data that can be used to identify an individual, either directly or indirectly. And it includes a plethora of items, including a name, address, social security number, date of birth, etc. We also include things like gender, race, or geographic indicators or locations. Organizations obviously are responsible for protecting the PII of their staff, but also their employees. And if you're a company, you should be protecting that information of your customers. There are areas or things that kind of fall under that PII category that we might not really think about. And we'll go over a couple of those as we move forward. So the first question is, where is all this information located? Well, we use social media. You're going to sign up. You're going to have an account, say, on Facebook, and it may contain things such as your name and your email address. And depending on what information you supply, it could be where you went to school at. Potentially, you could divulge your physical address and things like that. Online accounts, of course, if you're using online banking or credit card online credit card company for payments and whatnot. Organizational records, of course, if we're employed and the company or the organization, they have records on us as well as their customers or patrons. In the case of libraries, we have PII contained within the automation system. So you collect information about the patrons that are coming to your library, at least their name, usually their address, potentially an email and a telephone number. We don't want that information getting divulged out to the world at large through a breach. Personal computers and devices, of course. We all have a smartphone these days, or most of us do. And if you have a computer at home, and if even the computer work may have PII on it. Email is another potential source of that information. And this one kind of begs the question, and because this has occurred at our system, do you allow your patrons to email staff in order to print out something, right? So, you think about this for a moment. If you have a patron that comes in and they have a mortgage document, for instance, and they have no way of printing it themselves, and if you don't have a mobile print solution in place for them to be able to simply print it from their cell phone, do you allow them to email staff and then staff in turn print that out? Now you're handling PII, right? So, based on what your policies are, that may be acceptable or unacceptable. If you're allowing that, then you need to think about, getting that data off of the staff computer, out of that email immediately after, really. But, again, it's a concern. It's something we need to think about. Security camera recordings. Well, of course, security cameras are being, at least in our system, a very hot topic. And, the recordings that you're storing would have potentially could be used for facial recognition, license plate recognition, things like that, depending on the quality of the recording and the underlying NVR or the software that's being used. And then, of course, we have the good old-fashioned printed and handwritten records. I'm sure that there's probably a filing cabinet, a locked filing cabinet, or maybe a safe or some location within a library that's going to have printed records that may pertain at least to staff, your tax forms and things like that. So while that's not necessarily an online or a cyber type data source, it is definitely something to think about as far as its safety and security. Data breaches. So, we see this a lot, right? every time we turn around in the news, there's some new data breach. And I found a really nice little website that will allow us to kind of visualize exactly how many breaches are really happening at any one time. Let me get that moved over to my other screen so that you can see it. Whoops. Now, if I can get it minimized or maximized rather, so you can actually see the whole thing. Bear with me for just a moment. I'm technologically challenged, believe it or not.
Yesterday, while we were talking about how we talk through when we share on Zoom and things, and
Mhm.
we mentioned the fact that we don't think we'll ever go through a time where we don't either hear the presenter doing it or doing it ourselves. So you are not technology challenged. It just takes a minute to work through that process.
I'm trying to maximize this little screen so that it looks right on your end, and it's just giving me a fit. Bear with me for just a moment. Once I do it the first time, then any additional tabs that I open usually play nicely. So that's
That's
why
all
I've got
right.
my
We're
little
we're patient.
Hamlet right to the side. There we go. All righty. So this website kind of gives you a visual on data breaches, both recent and in years past. And as we look at these, of course, Ticketmaster was one of the biggest and more recent breaches. And then we have overseas, Indonesian and Shanghai. But notice that we
And
have
then
companies
Twitter
like
already has
Twitter
many.
and Facebook and further down, Microsoft. These are companies that deal with technology. Why are they getting breached, right? They're large repositories of PII. That's what the criminals, the hackers, if you will, are after, is that information that these large companies hold. Um, Sometimes they're a little bit lax with their security. We would hope that they would do a better job of protecting their customers, but reality is sometimes they don't. Facebook is in this list. Twitter is in it several times. As we scroll back in time, of course, it begins to kind of taper off. We see fewer and fewer as we scroll through. I think this goes all the way back to 2004. So you see fewer and fewer because, of course, people weren't really online as much further back in time we go. But that link is included in the slides and therefore in the handout so that you can explore that on your own at your leisure. And any one of these bubbles, as you mouse over them, will give you a brief description. You can click on that. It will take you to an article talking about the breach in more detail. There's another website that we can use to see breaches. Let me see if I can get it to come up correctly. There we go. Have I been pwned.com. So the original owner of this website was going out and looking at data breach information where he could find it. So he would sometimes go on the dark webs, where those repositories of the data sets were actually at, and then discover them and then post that, okay, this company had a breach and this is how many records. And he would then tie that back into a database where you can actually go in, type your email address, and find out if it was involved or listed in one of those breaches, one of those data sets. So it's a free service for individuals, and organizations and companies can actually sign up to have their whole domain, so that if any email account is found in a breach, you get a notification, which is kind of nice. But this is another resource, again, a link that's in the slides that you can go and peruse when you have time. Back into our slides now. There's a third link here for privacyrights.org, yet another site, basically the same information. I won't bother bringing that up. That's one of those homework items that we'll leave for you to look at later. Okay, other forms of data. What do we have besides PII? Obviously, we've got organizational data, such as financial records. If we were private sector, we would have potentially trade secrets and things like that that we would want to protect. Internal workflow documents. So, having that exposed can sometimes be a significant issue and a significant breach of security. And we'll give you an example here in the next slide. organizational charts, and internal directories and call trees. So if you're going to launch a what we call a spear phishing hack, where you're going to target somebody at a company or an organization, you're probably looking at the top of the call tree. You're looking for the CEO, you're looking for the director, or you're looking for somebody who's the assistant of one of those top dogs in the org chart. Because those are the ones that are going to yield the biggest results potentially, financially or data wise. So these forms of information that we have as a organization, as a library, of course, a lot of this is exposed on our websites, right? We have, probably a staff listing, and we say so and so is the director, such and such is the assistant director. So we're kind of small potatoes. We, let that information out in the wild, but larger companies tend to hide things like the email of the CEO, for instance. Um, you have to go through several layers to finally get to, the higher ups, as it were. So talking about internal workflow documents, I have an example here, and this is something that I had used on the presentation I gave prior on cyber psychology. Just kind of an aside, I think it's interesting though. 1978, a gentleman by the name of Stanley Rifkin was working under contract at the Security National Pacific Bank in Los Angeles. He was there ostensibly to help develop a backup system for that bank. He was there for several weeks at least, back and forth, in and out. All of the staff recognized him, knew him, got comfortable with his presence, never gave it a second thought when he would, show up in a room. So what he discovered was in their transfer procedure, and remember this is 1978. We're not fully computerized. So transfers, interbank transfers, were still done via phone calls, and they would have a special code, a daily transfer code that they would use to move monies from one bank to another. And Stanley discovered that they were writing down that transfer code on a clipboard, on a piece of paper, and leaving it in that special room out in the open. Well, one day he decided, mid-October, he walked into the transfer room. He saw the code as usual posted on the clipboard. He memorized it and he walked out of the bank. He immediately went and made a few phone calls, and next thing you know, $10.2 million was transferred from that bank through another one in New York and finally another in Switzerland where he had an account waiting for it. So again, the internal workflow documents. These are, kind of an important thing, even though this is not really cyber, truly cyber by our definition today. It didn't really use a lot of technology other than phone calls. It's still a piece of information we want to think about, especially in our libraries. You don't want to leave, staff PII information sitting at the circulation desk, for instance. So just in the back of your head, something to keep in mind. All right, now we're going to move into what we can do about protecting all of this valuable information that we have, both professionally and personally. So in cybersecurity, we have a concept, the onion model, which is basically a representation of what we would call defense in depth. And the idea here is that no one thing, no one device, no one application is going to be the 100% end all be all of security. You have to model things in such a way that you have layers, just like an onion. So, starting in the very core of that onion, we would have what we're trying to protect, in this case, the data. And the next layer out, we may have applications that we would, potentially install, like antivirus, anti-malware solutions to help protect that data. And the next layer out, we would have our devices and like the operating system, keeping that up to date and whatnot. Next layer out would be the network, where we're looking about, okay, am I using public Wi-Fi versus secure Wi-Fi, things like that. So, again, the whole idea here is that you have to kind of go through all of these different layers, all these different steps, and, put a check mark in each one to make sure that you protected yourself as much as you can. So that is the onion model in a nutshell. Let's move on. That is a representation of it graphically. And now we get to the meat of the matter. We'll start talking first about the applications. That's that first layer out from the data. Traditionally, applications by definition, back in the old days, was something that we installed locally on a computer, right? It was a program like Word or Excel or maybe Outlook for our email. But for this presentation and to kind of fit with the more modern time, we're also going to include online platforms and services. The line is getting blurred as to what is a application installed locally versus an application up in the cloud. So we're going to kind of lump them all together for this conversation. So the first question that I would pose to you is, do you know what an alert looks like from your antivirus solution? Truly know what it, should look like. In other words, if your computer were to be infected, either at work or at home, would you be able to recognize the box and say, aha, that is my Norton antivirus. It's telling me there's a problem, or that is my Avast or Bitdefender or whatnot. Being able to recognize the difference between the true security software and a fake security message that may be generated is kind of crucial. I don't know how many of you experience this. You probably have. Patrons go and hit a URL and maybe mistype it by one character, and the next thing you know, the computer screen has got all these messages popping up about, oh my God, the computer's infected, and you need to call this 800 number, et cetera, et cetera. So, as staff members, being able to recognize what the true program that should be, blocking the bad stuff versus the fake messages, that's kind of crucial. If you're not sure, especially on your home computers, there is an organization, icar.org, and I've got the link here kind of at the bottom of this slide, where you can go and you can download a test file. Now, typically, all of the vendors that make a antivirus solution or security solution recognize that or those files from iCar, and they will generate a prompt saying, we blocked it, right? The one oddball, I believe, is Windows Defender, the inbuilt security solution from Microsoft on Windows 10 and 11. I don't know that it actually generates a prompt so you can see that it blocked it, but most all of the others do. So let me move to an example here. In our case at SWKLS, we use ESET protection, and that is a screen cap of the little blob that, the little pop-up that comes up when I attempted to download that file from icar.org. So get to know your antivirus, know what's real and what's not. And speaking of antiviruses, understand that they are not bulletproof. Again, we're back to that statement that I made earlier about, there's not a one, end-all, be-all application that's going to protect you. We still have to have other layers and other things that, we need to take into consideration beyond just an antivirus, anti-malware, or security software that we may have on our computer. User interactions can sometimes circumvent these applications, these security products. So be very aware again that you are clicking, correctly, making sure that it's your real AV and not some fake message that was generated through a web browser, that you're doing the correct thing in order to handle or mitigate a problem. Bad actors, of course, are constantly trying to circumvent these products. It's kind of a cat and mouse game, if you will. One day the antivirus can pick up the bad software, the bad file, and the next day they've modified it such that maybe it can't. So that constant updating process that your product is going to have to do, you have to take that into account as well. There's a lot of different attack vectors, right? We have the online through web browser attack vector. We have emails that come in with bad attachments. That's another vector. We have files potentially that came on a USB thumb drive that we, plugged into our computer. By the way, never do that. If you find a USB drive lying on the parking lot somewhere at Walmart, don't take it home and stick it in your computer. Bad idea. That's another method, in fact, that hackers have been known to use. But the vectors that AVs are trying to fight against, there are many, many different vectors. Another consideration too are what we call zero-day vulnerabilities, and this is flaw in a program or possibly a piece of hardware, routing gear, for instance, that the manufacturer is not aware of. It has just come into light. Somebody's figured out a way to, leverage that flaw in order to do something, bad, typically against the device or your computer. And so these AV solutions and whatnot, even with gear, hardware, they have a hard time keeping ahead of the zero-day vulnerabilities that are out there. So in detail, zero-day vulnerabilities are, again, something that the manufacturer is not aware of quite yet. They haven't patched yet. That sometimes they will release an emergency patch for us. So we, as IT professionals, have to stay on top of these zero-day patches as they're made available. But sometimes there's a window of time that you're just kind of left to your own devices and hope you don't get hacked. The older first generation antivirus, anti-malware programs used to use definitions. So you would get an update of definitions and they would kind of compare the definition to a file to see if it was bad or good. That's kind of old school. The newer programs now, they leverage heuristics in order to look for, activity, suspicious activity and actions. That way they're not just dependent on those definition lists. And of course, now when we have with the advent of AI, we're hoping that that will improve the odds, so to speak, for the end user, where AI will enter the picture and be able to, analyze actions, behaviors, and whatnot on the local computer and possibly the network in order to mitigate or shut down any bad actions that might happen. So we talked about the fake messages in a browser. Here is an example, and I've also put a link to Google image search. And there's tons of variations on this. It can be a fake antivirus. It can be a message, proclaiming that it's the CIA, that you've done something on your computer, that you're in trouble for. Any number of different things that could put a person into a panic. And that's the last thing we want to do as the end user. Stay calm. Don't panic. It's not the end of the world. You want to act quickly. You might have to contact your IT person quickly, but don't click links, trying to resolve the problem. Think about it first. That critical thinking, where we really engage and give some deep thought before we do an action, that's what's going to save you 9 times out of 10. But these messages, when they pop up, they can look very legitimate. In fact, they even clone the true antivirus, anti-malware solution messages to the point that they're almost indistinguishable. What we tell our people when you get these on a web browser, for patron machines, because we use deep freeze, we just tell them, hold in the power button on the machine, let it shut down completely, power it back up, deep freeze. It's beautiful. It wipes out all the problems. You're good to go. Of course, in staff computers, it's a little bit different story. If we're available, during office hours for them to call, and we've kind of shown them how to do this too, the Control-Alt-Delete and find the process of the browser, Chrome, Edge, Firefox, in that task, in that process, and then typically you're okay afterwards. Or even for a staff computer or a home computer, hold in the power button. Don't click anything, just hold the power button in. That'll definitely kill the browser process. And when you turn it back on, hopefully you should be okay. Now, there's another kind of a side venture here with the related tech support scams. This is kind of seen an uptick as well, where you get unsolicited phone calls. And the reason I mention this and tie it together is sometimes those pop-up messages in the web browsers are like Microsoft support. It's an unsolicited, hey, you got a problem with your computer, we can fix it, call the 1-800 number here. We also get phone calls now, proclaiming someone from Microsoft, hey, we noticed a problem with your machine. Don't go any further in those calls. Just, hang up on them. You don't want to give them remote access to your computer. Microsoft is not going to call you at home. I almost guarantee, unless you reached out to them first about something. Okay, so for home use, this comes up quite a bit. What should I use for an antivirus solution? Well, It kind of it changes every year, it seems, as to what the top recommendation is, by consensus of the bigger, online presences. Tom's Hardware, for instance, is a reputable website. I've provided a link there where they break down, I think, top 8 antivirus solutions. Typically, it seems to be Bitdefender, Norton Antivirus, and maybe McAfee. Those usually take somewhere at the top of the list, but something is better than nothing. And again, Windows 11 does have a built-in, Windows 10 and Windows 11, I believe, have that built-in Windows Defender antivirus. And this is going to come down to your browsing habits, what you're actually doing online. Personally, being an IT person, when I'm home, I'm not hitting very many websites. I've got a core list of maybe 6 or 8 that I touch. I don't go, clicking on rando links on Google for anything. So I could probably get by with the built-in Defender, antivirus or security solution. If you have a younger person in your household and you're concerned about, them getting themselves in trouble, probably want to go with a better security solution. Pick one from, the list on the link provided, or another reputable website that has a top, list that you can look at. So now we're moving into electronic mail or email. Why is this one important, I wonder? Well, pivot attacks. So your email is tied to so many different accounts. I mean, it's how you start the process of creating an account, right? If you want a Facebook account or an Amazon account or LinkedIn, you're going to have to provide an email address. And so as a repository of data, it's invaluable for a hacker. I mean, if they get access to your email account, that's almost the keys to the kingdom these days. It gives them insight, if nothing else, as to other accounts that you have, where they can potentially pivot and do some significant damage, especially when you're dealing with like bank accounts and credit card accounts and things like that. So we push the notion of using improved authentication mechanisms at work and for our libraries, where not only do you supply a username and password, but you also have multi-factor or two-factor authentication enabled, perhaps the Authenticator app on your personal cell phone. You should be doing that at home. Or you could step up your game and go to the newer kid on the block in terms of authentication, which is called PassKeys. And we'll talk about that in a few slides from now. And the same thing holds true with your work email. It's another one of those. You don't want to lose access to that and allow hackers to ransack. So the general email tips, I'm sure most of you have heard these before, but we're going to go through them. A refresher. It doesn't hurt to reinforce what we already know. First would be, for personal use, definitely deleting old emails. The reason there is that if you've got 10 years of personal email sitting in your inbox, that's more information if your email account were to be compromised that somebody could leverage. So you may want to, set some time aside and do a clean out and get rid of the old stuff that you no longer really need to retain. Maybe every 6 months of messages, 6 months worth at the most would be a good, target. Password hints. So when you go to sign up for certain accounts, they like to also have you select password hints or security questions. What's your mother's maiden name? Where did you go to high school? Things like that. That information may very well be contained within your email, right? If you've got an email from high school, for your high school for a reunion, that could be there. Potentially, maiden names, things like that. So you be careful about how that is stored. If you don't need it in your email inbox, perhaps you might want to delete it. Now, for work-related emails, things are slightly different. We have to potentially think about retention policies. So for that, you're going to have to fall back to, what your library retention policies are, or your regional system, what they recommend, making sure that you're not deleting something that you perhaps should not delete. So. Obviously, be aware of unsolicited emails. If it's coming from somebody that you don't recognize, especially if it has an attachment, you probably shouldn't open it. You should probably just delete it. Never click on links from unknown senders. That's kind of something we've drilled into everybody's heads over time. Never opening attachments, making sure that you don't get caught on that one. And also be very, very cautious if you receive an email that concerns resetting your password for your email account or any other online account. If you're not the one that initiated that password reset, there may well be somebody that's attempting to gain foothold into that account. You may need to follow up with that vendor or platform in order to make sure that it's not been compromised, or maybe change the password, or if you haven't already in the options there, up your game for login with 2FA, MFA, or PassKeys. And speaking of the password reset emails, I have another example of this coming up in the slides we'll look at a little bit further or closer. URL shorteners. This was a big thing for many years. People loved URL shorteners. You could take this long, nasty, URL and stick it into this web page, and it would spit back out a nice, short little thing that you could then, stick in an email or put on your website. The problem with a lot of those is that when you mouse or move your mouse over, hover over the link, it doesn't unfurl to the true final destination, as it were. And so I'm not really a big fan of it. Especially when you're getting an email that has a recognized shortened URL, you want to be especially careful about clicking the link there, because, as I said, you may not be able to hover over it and see where the actual destination is going to take you. An example, if you've not heard of URL shorteners, I've included a link here so you can kind of look at one and get the feel for it. Okay, here we have an example of a bad email, and we're looking at something that ostensibly is from Amazon.com, but when we look at the header information up here, we notice that the domain is efficacious, SR Bay, XYZ, something, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that didn't come from Amazon, right? We can tell that pretty quickly. And of course, further down in the email, they've got a nice little blue link for you to click on, and they're pushing a sense of urgency where you have to do this now. Don't wait. The link expires. That sense of urgency, that's one of those cognitive biases that can be leveraged in social engineering. So this one's pretty obvious. I think we could all recognize this as junk that should be deleted. Another example here, a little bit more crafty. Now we're masking the header information. It looks like it's coming from irs.gov, but then as we move further into the body of the email, they've included a link to some rando website or domain that certainly isn't anything the IRS would use. Pretty good giveaway that it's junk, again, that we should not treat it with anything other than a delete. And then another here where we have a message ostensibly from Bank of America, and it's looking pretty good, right? Pretty legit all the way through until we get to the link that they provided. And as we hover our mouse over it, it's kind of hard to see in the slide, but at the bottom left there, it reveals that the destination URL is not, in fact, Bank of America. Although Bank of America is included in that URL, it's not the top level or furthest left on the domain, so we know it's not really going to their website. How many of you have seen this before? You get an email from FedEx or UPS saying, hey, you've missed your delivery, but don't worry. All you got to do is download this attachment, open it up, fill out the form, come to our office. You'll be right as rain. Yeah, it's a scam. Don't open it. Unfortunately, we've had a couple of our people fall for this one, and we've had to do a couple computer reloads as a result. So be careful out there. Okay, so again, you've all probably, known the stuff about email. That's pretty bog standard for cybersecurity. Social media, we're going to move on a little bit to another, online application, as it were. And, cherry picking what we could talk about, social media would probably be, at the top of the list, which is why I chose it. Obviously, you've got to be cautious when you're using that personally and professionally. You're really worried about what you're sharing online. Obviously, never ever put anything about, your address, date of birth, anything like that. Nobody, I don't think, would. But things that we don't often think about is, well, what about vacation or travel plans? That's a big no-no too. Don't post about, hey, I'm getting ready to go to Hawaii with a family and we're going to be gone for 2 weeks. That could potentially be used by somebody who's, kind of stalking to say, oh, okay, now I can go to their house and break in and steal everything and they'll never know. Photos while you're traveling may reveal where you're at as well. So if you snap a picture of yourself standing in Hawaii, that might be a giveaway to somebody who is, again, watching your moves and giving them an opportunity to steal. So there was a concern about when you take photos and upload them into social media platforms, whether they would reveal your location via the EXIF data. Most of the platforms like Facebook, they strip the EXIF data out now. Some platforms don't. So you have to kind of be careful about that and research it. Personally, I would just wait until you got home. I know you're dying to get those great pictures uploaded as quickly as possible, but wait until you get home. Then you can upload them all at once. So another thing we want to do too is review our privacy settings for each one of these platforms. Facebook especially has a whole slew of different settings that will determine whether your posts are shared publicly versus a small select group of people that you've chosen. Other settings. I've included a couple links on this slide. Again, this falls back to kind of your homework stuff where you can look and find more information about what these some of these platforms do with your data in terms of do they have the right to share it? Do they have the right to utilize it in a fashion that you didn't really think about? So it's kind of eye-opening. Remember, these companies are making money off of you. They've got to make money in order to stay in business, and it's your private data that they're after. They want to analyze your behaviors and try to give you ads that are targeted to you specifically. But we'll talk about the privacy setting aspect of this here in a slide or two. So, okay, for our hosts and devices, we have kind of different categories here. We have like your laptop computer, your desktop computer. You might have other devices, especially Internet of Things or IoT devices. You might have a smart TV at home or at work. There could be any number of things that are internet connected these days that we need to consider in terms of protecting them and protecting ourselves. The first up is our desktop and laptop computers, making sure that we have backups on a regular basis. And this, of course, at work and at home, not if, but when disaster strikes, that you'll have your data secure in order to bring it back on another machine or after your computer is repaired. For home devices, a lot of people use external USB drives. You might consider unplugging that drive when it's not being used or needed. So if your backup runs overnight, leave the drive plugged in the morning, unplug it, that type of thing. It's air gapping is what we call it. You really might consider storing your backups in more than one physical location as well. So maybe you've got that local drive at home, but also augment that with a cloud storage. There's a lot of options out there now, Microsoft OneDrive and Dropbox and a slew of others that you can investigate as a cloud storage for your backup files. The big thing here is to test them from time to time, make sure they'll actually work when you need them. The program that you use should have a facility to, restore a file as a test. That would be a good thing to do from time to time. Otherwise, essentially what you're doing is what we like to refer to as faith-based backups. You hope to God that they're going to work when you need them. Not a good strategy. Again, we mentioned different, backup repositories online that you could use. As far as the software goes, here at the system, we use Veeam Agent for Windows, which is free. That's an option for home use as well. There are others out there, OneDrive with Microsoft as a kind of quasi backup solution. But again, investigate and make sure you have something that you're backing up your computer with. Updating your devices. So again, this is encompassing the whole enchilada, your computers, your smart devices, your personal cell phones, your tablets, your IoT devices, your routers that you have at home, all of that stuff. Really, we need to be, mindful of keeping them up to date. So, here's the broken down list. Obviously, the operating system. With most of the operating systems, like with Windows, it automatically updates. So that's kind of a nice thing now. Unfortunately, the updates sometimes break things, but at least they're trying to do that automatically for you. Android, sometimes like on my device, I might have to allow it to process the updates through. But when it comes up with a message saying there are updates available, go ahead and do it. Applications, whatever installed apps you might have, used to be with Adobe Reader and Office, we would have to do manual updates at times. But again, a lot of these have gotten automated where they just kind of do that on their own and then notify you when they need to be restarted. Web browsers especially are good about doing that these days. For home use, you're not typically going to have special, like development platforms or special programs or things like that. But if you do, obviously, making sure that you keep those up to date as possible. Antivirus programs, again, almost all of them will automatically do updates. No worries there. Now, one thing that sometimes is not an automatic update is the device drivers, especially for personal computers. For a Windows computer, as an example, there may be, well, let me back up a second. A device driver is a little bit of code that sits between the operating system and a bit of hardware. So it could be like your sound card portion of your motherboard, or it could be some external device. That's what, or printers especially use drivers. So you may need to go out to the manufacturer's website and check if there's an updated driver that you need to install. And it's fairly easy. Again, the manufacturers want you to keep up to date on that stuff. And I've provided a link to Lenovo's website as an example where you can go, you put in the make, the model, or the serial number of the device, and it gives you a list. Even has a nice little automatic installer. If you download that, it'll take care of it for you. Or you can do it manually if you're a little bit more tech savvy. So another category kind of in the same vein is what we call firmware. So this is more low-level code. It gets burned typically into a device, like a ROM or something on security cameras, routers, things like that, may require a firmware update. And a lot of these are not automatic. So that's where you have to really, break out the magnifying glass and put on your Sherlock Holmes cap and do a little bit of digging on the manufacturer's website to find if there's an update available for your particular camera or smart TV or something like that. So again, we mentioned Windows 11 updates are pretty simplistic these days, but of course we do need to be cognizant of the fact that Windows 10, if you have a device running Windows 10 at home, that it will go end of life in October of this year. Microsoft has made possible security updates for companies who are willing to pay to continue using Windows 10, but I don't think you want to do that at home. Now, the other thing too, we mentioned about Windows 11 updates, I kind of hinted at this earlier, that sometimes things will break, okay? When that happens, Windows 11 has several different features for system recovery. which you can get into. The updates, if they break, you have typically a 10-day window. If you know that something is not working right, within that 10-day window, you can roll back that major update in order to potentially fix a problem. After the 10 days, you're pretty much, it ain't going to work. But they do have other, options within that recovery window. You go start menu and system recovery. It gives you things like, okay, we can just go ahead and reset your computer, but we can keep all of your files, applications, settings, but we'll just do an override of the operating system, kind of refresh it. That may fix a problem. There's other options where it will just blow out everything but your actual data files and do a reinstallation. And then I think there's also an option where it will just do a complete factory reset, like you just unboxed it.
I have
So,
a question. So
uh-huh.
I have personally an older computer with Windows 10 on it, and it will not support Windows 11. What are my options at that point?
Well, you can roll the dice and chance running Windows 10 at home. I wouldn't, unless it's something for a very, very specific reason. And then potentially only if it were air gapped. In other words, you're not going to use it online at all. Now, that has actually come up in our libraries, and I'll give you an example. You have a microfilm reader that you paid $10,000 for, hooked up to a computer, and the microfilm reader manufacturer never bothered releasing the software updates to support, say, Windows 10 or 11. Are you going to replace, $10,000 piece of equipment? This comes up in manufacturing a lot, in medical field a lot, where you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. But those are very specific, task computers, and they are typically air gapped where they don't have internet access. So if it's one of those specific situations, yeah, maybe you can continue. But if you're using it as a daily driver online, I wouldn't.
No, it's just
There,
video games.
yeah,
I know,
yeah.
online video games. So I have to look at either getting a new operating system or getting a new computer, right?
Well, there's the rub. You might not have an option to upgrade to Windows 11 depending on the hardware. That was one of the stipulations with Windows 11 is that it would not support certain older versions of the CPU, the processing unit. It would also not support computers that did not have the Trusted Platform Module chip, or TPM, which is a security feature. So you may not have the ability. Now, Microsoft did release a tool that you can check and see if your computer is Windows 11 capable. So I would run that tool, determine if you are, well, okay, now you've got a path forward. You can upgrade it to Windows 11 and life is good. But if it says, nope, sorry, it won't support Windows 11, you're probably looking at replacing it. Or if you want to really go down the nerdy path, you can replace it with an alternate operating system like Linux. But that's only for the very brave.
I've heard so many things about Linux over the years. Yeah, we have a lot of libraries with older computers. Andy's been doing a really good job keeping them upgraded, but that's something that we're going to have to keep in mind. Thank you for answering my question.
Sure. Okay, so moving on. IoT, or Internet of Things devices, security cameras, smart doorbells, smart televisions. We could probably even throw in smart toothbrushes, appliances. I mean, you name it, everything is internet connected, right? These are devices we really have to be mindful of. Smart TVs especially. We'll talk about why smart TVs in particular here in a moment. But they fall into this category. Security cameras, especially the ones that are storing data up in the cloud. I'm not a big fan. I'll be honest, as far as organizational wise, we deter our libraries from using these types of cameras like Ring, Nest, UEFI, Wise, etc. Also because they've been known to turn over video footage without a warrant. So it's a patron privacy issue. But, again, if you're using those at home, think about, updating them, going into the app, seeing if there's an update available, things like that. The crazy thing is, you know, Verkada or Verkada, depending on how you pronounce it, they are a huge player in the security camera market, and they had a vulnerability in some of their older cameras. So, you know, it hits everybody. It isn't just the small time, you know, like Ring Nest versus the big time players. Everybody, you know, can potentially have a vulnerability in these devices. So for home devices especially, check to see if there's an update available from time to time. Hopefully the app will notify you if you have an app tied to it. Smart doorbells with cameras, same thing. Smart TVs, we kind of mentioned. You know, the thing here is we want to try to buy from a reputable vendor. Knockoff brands are probably going to be more trouble than they're really worth. They look enticing sitting on the shelf of Walmart. Hey, I'll just grab that. That'll do the job. But if you've never heard of the company or it has some strange name, you may not want to, you know, risk it. When it comes to cameras, I especially, you know, push the idea that you may want to have something that's going to store that recording on local storage, like an SD card at the very least, or maybe you go with a full-blown network video recorder or NVR. Of course, the price is going to increase as a result, but it's more secure in my opinion. You're not beholden to a cloud service to store that recording, and especially in our libraries, that's a big sticking point. We kind of draw the line with them and say we don't want to see a Ring camera shoved up in the corner by the door anywhere. Let's talk about a real, you know, business class solution. Okay, default passwords on equipment. This used to be a huge problem. A vendor would make a wireless router, and I'm going to pick on Netgear. And every model of that Netgear or every item in that model range would have the same default login information. And it didn't prompt you really to change it. You could bypass the change password prompt, no problem, and just plug it into your network and go with it. And of course, those default passwords were all online, easily, you know, searchable. And a lot of people didn't know any better. You just plug it in and you go. That's, you know, potentially a back door that a hacker or criminal could use. Security and video cameras, we've seen the same thing with them. IoT devices, printers, you name it. So where's the harm? Well, the problem is when they are publicly accessible. And you've left all these default configurations in place, then the hackers come across your device and they say, aha, I've got access to your, you know, smart TV or your camera. Now I'm going to utilize it in a large scale attack. And this happens quite a bit, especially with smart TVs. You know, they gather up the logins, they get into your devices, and then they use all of these now zombie clients to, you know, maybe launch a distributed denial of service attack where they're slamming traffic into a company that they don't like, or, you know, somebody that they don't like who has a server. The other issue too, at least it was for many years, was with the wireless routers. It wasn't uncommon where you could drive into a neighborhood and, you know, you're looking for open wireless signals. You would see a half a dozen Netgear, you know, wireless signals running, you know, in the same neighborhood. The bad thing there is if you leave everything at the default, the hackers know that, and if your phone is turned on to such that it will just automatically connect and you travel, now somebody could be sitting there with that same Netgear wireless signal running. Your phone connects up to it without you being aware of it, and you're passing traffic to somebody who's sniffing it. So, you know, change the default configurations. Most of the vendors have gotten better about this, especially with wireless routing gear, where you are forced to change the password, you are forced to pick a wireless name, and all of these things. But there are still, you know, some companies that don't adhere or follow that, you know, better security practices. So I mentioned botnets, and we kind of alluded to it with the smart TVs being hacked and cameras being hacked in order to facilitate, you know, large-scale attacks on websites. So these are botnets. Last year, the top three attacks that were carried out through botnet traffic. The first was Raptor Train botnet. It had over 200,000 devices. So 200,000 mostly home, consumer grade devices via a smart TV, a set-top box, whatever, were compromised and then used in a large scale attack to try to take down a company's website or server or something like that. I mentioned that Verkada also had a bad exploit for some of their older cameras, and they were actually spreading malware. Um, the last little bit here, this came from Cloudflare, because Cloudflare kind of analyzes this traffic. They sit mostly in the middle of the traffic flow, helping protect websites and whatnot. And they notice that by and large, the highest amount of compromised devices they can trace back to being smart TVs. So, again, it's a concern. In a perfect world, none of these devices would really reach out beyond your local network. They would not talk to the internet at large. They wouldn't pass traffic. But we all know the reality of why it's happening, especially with smart TVs. They're collecting data about you. What are you browsing? What are you streaming? What are you watching right now? So unless you are very, tech savvy and know how to configure firewall rules and all sorts of crazy stuff, it's something you're going to have to either accept or ban from your household. Okay, keep moving on here. Now we're getting up another layer in our onion model, and now we're at the network level. And let me talk about wireless first. So public Wi-Fi and default SSIDs, I kind of mentioned that, older times where you would have, dozens of Netgear wireless signals running in a neighborhood. Cell phones have a bad habit of connecting to Wi-Fi on their own, and that's a great thing for us libraries, right? Because that counts as stats. When we have a patron that walks in the door to drop off a book, if they've used our public library and their phone Wi-Fi is turned on, it'll probably just attach while they're walking in the door and before they walk out. That's just, that's a hit. That's a stat. We get to turn that in on our state report. But you may want to think about that as a individual when you're traveling. Do you need to have your cell phone Wi-Fi enabled at all times? Do you need to have the Bluetooth enabled at all times? These are things that you might consider turning off if you're not, actively using them. This is kind of a crazy statement because most of our public libraries offer free Wi-Fi. But you as an individual, when you travel, you may want to be very cautious about using free Wi-Fi. I would say if you're going to use free Wi-Fi, do it at a library. Probably don't want to do it at some rando location. You never know who's sitting on that same network with you, or potentially if they have spun up a fake network that looks like, for instance, the free Wi-Fi at the hotel. You think it's the hotel name and you connect to it, and in fact it's somebody else doing some nefarious activity that's watching your traffic, sniffing it, and collecting information. The newer suggestion for travel and maybe even home use would be to use a virtual private network, or VPN, when you travel. I don't have a list of options for that. That's something that it's a little bit higher level when we talk about IT stuff and networking. So I'll just mention it and I'll allow you to do your research on VPNs. There are many different services out there. In terms of our home network security, like running our Wi-Fi routers, there are two excellent resources that you should look at. The first being the staysafeonline.org website. They have a page that talks about securing your home network. And the second is actually from the FTC. And again, I'll leave those for you to look at on your own when time permits. I will mention that the staysafeonline.org website is actually the National Cybersecurity Alliance. That is an excellent resource for all information when it comes to cybersecurity, and I've included it several times in this presentation. We'll talk about it and the NCSA a little bit later. So with home networks and work networks, one thing that we deal with is the rise of ads. Every time you go to a website now, it's just chock full of ads that are bouncing in and out. And the bad thing about it is these ads that are pushed onto legitimate websites are through channels that that website doesn't have any control over. Okay, so it's an ad channel. The ad channel has paid that website owner to allow these ads onto their primary website or their domain, and they can be a source of malware. So one consideration for home use is to potentially block ads from coming across the network. Um, so in order to facilitate that, there are different solutions. There used to be browser plugins, ad blockers, if you will, AdGuard Plus, and other ones that you could, install in Chrome and Firefox. They're kind of on the decline. There's kind of a back and forth with the developers of the web browsers and these solutions, and the it's not looking good for the plugin developers, we'll put it like that. But you can do this on a more global scale, if you will, by using a service that will work with your home router. The gist here is that we're replacing the domain name service or server that your router would use normally to resolve, say, yahoo.com to an IP address, a machine address. Kind of the analogy here is like the old telephone book, right? Tom Smith, he is at 555-6543. So that's what DNS is doing kind of behind the scenes. You type in yahoo.com, it translates it to a number, an IP address. So these solutions basically work by lying. They say, okay, if you're reaching out and we see an ad and it's coming from this domain, we're going to lie to your web browser and tell it, yep, we can't find it. And so you don't actually end up seeing the ads. They get blocked or black holed. They work, they're effective. The issue is a lot of websites are now recognizing, hey, you're running an ad blocker, and therefore we're not going to give you access to our website because it's a revenue stream that you're taking away from us. So you have to be mindful of this. With these services, and one, and I'll just point out, I've actually included a link here that lists out several, but I use NextDNS at home, and it does have the ability where you can add or remove domains to be blocked or unblocked. So you can modify the base list, as it were. If you encounter an issue loading a website, you can say, okay, don't filter that particular domain or maybe the ad channel that's running behind it. But an effective solution. The other nice thing about these ad blocker solutions like NextDNS is that they also typically include blocking malware domains. So, websites that are strictly, dishing out malware and whatnot, they kind of include that in their block list for you. So some of these are free, some of these are paid, some of them have a mix where, okay, you're free up until you hit a certain number of DNS requests, and then after that you have to pay. You might take the time, again, for homework, look into those if you're interested for home use. This DNS filtering, as it were, this is the solution that we use for our libraries, just at a different scale for SEPA compliance. Again, when somebody tries to go to a website that would be considered harmful content, we simply have our server lie to the computer and say, nope, can't find it. And that's how we block that type of traffic. Okay, browsing the web, we're moving forward now in our network layer. We should all know by now that anytime we go to a website, we want to see that HTTPS. That S part is really crucial. That stands for secure. Demonstration link there for Bank of America. Notice that the link HTTPS : 2//, etc. Anytime we do not have that S, that's where we need to be cautious, especially if it's wanting us to enter in credentials for a login, because then it's sent in clear text. Chances are it's a setup. They're trying to scalp or fish that information. Um, Anytime if you're using an HTTPS, a secure website, and you're getting some error message or warning message, you may check your computer clock. Not so much an issue with newer computers, but older ones, sometimes the time would drift enough on the clock of the computer that it would kind of break the encryption of that HTTPS in the browser. Hovering over links before clicking them to see where they go. We talked about that in email. That should be pretty standard practice. If you're going out and doing a search term on Google and you just start clicking rando links, you're probably going to get yourself in trouble. Just be mindful of the links, and especially when you land on a page, watch the links to navigate through the menu structure on that website. Sometimes they can be crafted to take you off to, somewhere bad. Privacy checkups. Okay, we talked about this briefly before with Facebook and social media platforms. Again, I'm going to point you to the staysafeonline.org website. Let me bring up the second link because I think this is the cooler one of the two. And this page will give you a list of links to go to for a lot of the popular websites that you use. So e-commerce, mobile banking, email, social media, etc. And I'm going to find Facebook here in social networks. And when I click that, it should take me directly to the page where I can see all of those settings that help control, who can see my posts. Is my data, accessible publicly or within the group that I specify? All of those little things. That's what you want to be mindful of, especially on the social media platforms. Again, think about their business model. They are harvesting your information, but you can control it at least to some extent. The top link here, I won't click on right now. It does go to an article, again, on that same website, talking about managing your digital footprint online. It's a really good resource. That's, again, homework. We'll talk about passwords briefly. We've all, been over the basics as far as complexity versus length. I'll just click on this link here for an older XKCD comic strip. We typically think in terms of, well, if the password is complex, in other words, I've used uppercase, lowercase, special characters, that is better than a long password. The cartoon here kind of points out that's not really the case. In fact, they recommend that you could use a phrase as a password. In this case, correct horse battery staple would be potentially more secure than using a shorter password, even with the uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. So think in those terms when you go to create a new password or modify an existing one. That sometimes longer is better than complexity. Of course, we always stress don't reuse passwords. Okay, you know what? I do. I'm sure everybody here does. If you're gonna do it, at the very least, think about a tiered approach where you have one password that you use only for your high value accounts like your banking and your email, maybe another password for those mid-tier accounts like social media, another for vendors and shopping, and one that's used for like a throwaway for low-level accounts. At least break it up a little bit. Now, the better option really is to use a password manager that will just automatically generate a long, nasty password for you that you'd never have to remember to go for each one of these accounts. Or even better than that, would be to use some of the newer forms of login, like PassKeys, which we'll talk about here in a minute. We looked at the Have I Been Pwned website earlier. Again, just briefly, that website will allow you to put in your email address and get a search and find out what breaches your email may have been contained in with those data sets. Really handy, and it'll also notify you. You can set it up so that it will notify you, hey, there was another data breach, your email was involved in it. You may want to go out to that site and change your password. We talked about not entering your credentials on unsecured web pages. If you're not, let me go back. If you're not familiar, there are USB hardware devices that you can use in place of like the multi-factor authentication apps. YubiKey is a popular one. We use those infrequently here at SWKLS. I put a link to the YubiKeys, and again, you can look on that when time permits. We really push for a password manager within our library membership rather than a bunch of sticky notes and Excel spreadsheets and little notebooks. At home, you can also do the same thing. There are a lot of options for password managers. I believe I have links to the two that we have familiarity with here at SWKLS. That would be a free password manager called KeyPass, and another potentially free option called Bitwarden. In fact, Bitwarden is what we use for rolling out to our membership now. So for home use, they have a free offering. You may want to consider using that if at home you do the same thing with sticky notes or a notebook or an Excel spreadsheet. We also recommend not saving really critical logins in your web browser. I know it's convenient, but really, your bank account login probably shouldn't be saved in Chrome. Either memorize it or use password manager or some other form of authentication. Also pointing out, being careful about those password hints and security questions. Think about this for a moment. Married woman, you hyphenate your maiden name and your married name, and you post it out on Facebook. And you're also friends with your children who are adults now and they have banking accounts. Guess what they probably had as a security question? What's your mother's maiden name, right? So that breadcrumb trail, you have to think in those terms. Unfortunately, it's the reality of the world. Don't post information that you don't absolutely have to, or at least not the stuff like that. Okay, we kind of touched upon the different methods of authentication that go in addition to a username and password. I'm going to provide you with links for homework here. Looking at differences between, multi-factor authentication versus PassKeys, which we will talk about a little bit more briefly. The first link is a YouTube video, which actually demonstrates how multi-factor authentication using an app, the time-based TOTP tokens, how it can be defeated basically by a hack that intercepts that TOTP token, that number that you get on your authenticator app. That's an interesting video to look at. The other ones are basically deep diving into those authentication mechanisms. And then the last two are one about PassKeys and the FIDO Alliance, which is actually a group of the bigger name companies that come together to try to come up with solutions that are more secure for logins, including PassKeys. And here we get to PassKeys, the new kid on the block. Again, this is something that came out of the FIDO Alliance. WebAuthn is the backend protocol. This is the passwordless authentication. So now, rather than typing in a username, typing in a password, getting an authentication code, now you have something like a PIN or biometric authentication where you're using facial recognition using your webcam, or maybe a fingerprint reader that's embedded on your laptop, many different ways. In the back end, it's thought to be more secure because it's using asymmetric encryption. We're using a public and private key pair. This type of encryption we've used in IT for years for behind the scenes things. It's quite robust and quite secure. And if it makes it easier for people where they don't have to jot down a password on a sticky note and stick it to their monitor, I'm all for it. Microsoft has implemented that with Windows Hello or Windows Hello for Business as an option for logging in on your computer or for Intra ID. Google has an implementation now. A lot of the bigger names do. You may want to investigate that, as it would make your life easier and it would also be more secure. Okay, We're getting through. We're going to go on to the human element. This has to do with social engineering. Here, we're basically hacking humans. The 2024 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report said that 68% of breaches involved a non-malicious human element. Somebody made a mistake. They fell victim to a social engineering attack or made an error. In the context of InfoSec, we're looking at the psychological manipulation of an individual in some way, shape, or form in order to accomplish our hack. It is far easier to hack a person than it is a computer. That's the bottom line. This quote I love. This was by Bruce Schneer. Only amateurs attack machines, professionals target people. Okay. He made this in a response to back in 2000, where a press distribution service called Internet Wire got a forged email and said the CEO of this company is going to resign and their earnings are going to be restated. Internet Wire did not verify the authenticity of that email. They just ran with it. Other news services picked up on the same thing. They posted it. And suddenly, that company had $2.54 billion worth of market valuation wiped out because nobody bothered verifying an email that was sent to one or a handful of people. So that kind of gives you the scope of how bad it can get when you're not careful, and also that social engineering aspect. There wasn't any real computer hacking here. Somebody just sent an email and did that much damage. Now, it was discovered to be a fake, and things were resolved after a few hours. But the scope, again, is staggering. The common social engineering methods, we're going to pose as somebody in authority. We're going to masquerade as somebody like I'm from Microsoft and I'm here to help. We're going to pose as a vendor. Hey, I'm the guy that works on your, from the company that works on your copying machine, that type of thing. These are things, if you're not familiar with the individual, if you don't know them, that you need to ask for credentials, you need to question whether they are truly who they say they are. Of course, enticement to personal gain when we're offering some form of a prize or something of value in exchange for, help, like in quid pro quo. These are social engineering methods. Blackmail, of course, you get the email that says, hey, we know what you've been doing on your computer. There's no sense in denying it. We've got the recordings, and pay us so many Bitcoins or else we're going to release some blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that it's all blackmail. And unfortunately is effective. People fall for these things. One interesting one is mentioning, okay, so I call up and I say, hey, I was on the phone with your colleague Joan yesterday. She was helping me with something. Is she there today? And you say, no, she's off. And, oh, well, hey, maybe you can help me instead. Now, what did that do? What happened there? The person probably scoped out, knew that that employee worked for your organization, took a chance that she wasn't there that day, or maybe they knew based on a calendar that you had exposed for a schedule. And then they called, and now you kind of think, well, wait a second, that person, they already talked to one of my colleagues, they must be legit. So sure, I'll give them a hand, right? Social engineering at its finest. Warning signs. So, again, when we're dealing with social engineering, be it over the phone or, dealing with person online or an email, anytime there's stressing urgency, if you don't act now, something negative is going to happen. If they give you just a flood of information and you're kind of forced into choosing, that's information overload or choice overload. We talked about offering free goods or services, unsolicited offers of help, name dropping, like the earlier example, decision for success or failure. So they call up and say, hey, man, you got to really help me out here. If you don't, I'm going to get fired, right? Kind of puts the pressure on your side of the court. Unknown person alleging authority or knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. I'll let you go through this list later, but this is one of those things. These are tactics. These are things that you have to be kind of on guard for. How do they kind of play in? Well, scareware, right? That sense of urgency, something bad has happened. Phishing emails, especially with unrecognized invoices, you feel like a sense of commitment. Oh my God, we got to pay the company's bills. Can't let this invoice go unpaid. Undeliverable packages. We talked about FedEx packages and attachments. Going down the list, spear fishing and whale fishing. We talked about that, right? Whale fishing, I'm looking for the biggest person in the organization to try to get them to divulge information. And Gail's putting her hands up in the air. Voice phishing or vishing, that's kind of a newer one there, using basically the same tactics. A newer one that's kind of come onto the scene is what's called pig butchering. And this is where you're doing the long-term scam. You're kind of getting the person involved at first. You're engaging them over social media or maybe a text message out of the blue, and you're slowly increasing your ask. At first, it's like, hey, can you help me with this? Or maybe, hey, do you have $5? And over time, you're trying to get them further and further in to whatever that scam might be. It might be purchasing some, Bitcoin equivalent of cryptocurrency or some business venture or something like that. And once you've got them on the hook fully, but at the point where you're going to realize the biggest gain, that's when you pull the rug. Right? It's called pig butchering. There's a link here for the FDIC. They've got a nice little article or handout that you can look at to get more information. Why do they succeed? Of course, we talked about this. These are all cognitive biases that they're playing against, that sense of authority, the strong effect where you have time and pressure, halo effect. Hey, I recognize that company. It's legit. Reciprocity, that person is doing something for me, I'm doing something for them. The Nigerian prince email scam. The list goes on and on. Representativeness is an interesting one, comparing similarity between something that you know versus something that you're now encountering. That's definitely a cognitive bias one. So move quickly here. Now I'm going to give you an example. This is one that I used in my last presentation. Fancy Bear is a hacking group out of Russia. They're Advanced Persistent Threat 28 is their subtitle or name in the hacking circle. They're a state actor level group of hackers. They targeted the Clinton campaign in 2016 with a spear phishing hack. So this is going to show you, how all this kind of comes into play, both the social engineering and whatnot. Okay, so John Podesta, Billy Reinhardt, other members of the Clinton campaign received an email looking pretty much like this. Billy Reinhardt's came in late in the day, in the evening, and it was basically, hey, your email, your Google Gmail, someone has your password. They signed into your account. Here's the details, the date, the time, the IP address, the location, Ukraine. That's important. Google stop this sign-in attempt. You should change your password immediately, right? Sense of urgency. And here we have a nice blue button that says, click here to change your password. It's just that simple. Okay. If you don't know any better, this looks pretty legitimate. And, well, Billy and John, they all pretty much thought the same. And that's what they did, is they clicked the link. Now, this is what a real alert from Google looks like. It is color-wise, pretty close. We're using blue and red, a little bit less than the first image. But notice the difference in the wording. Sign-in attempt was blocked. Someone just used your password to try to sign in. Google blocked them, but you should check what happened. So it's non-committal. It could have been you that did it, and we're blocking you because we don't know, exactly if you're who you say you are. And then it says check activity. It doesn't say anything about reset password. So very similar, very subtly different in terms of the verbiage here. So what did we do here? Well, we made the email look like the real deal. That's representativeness. The availability effect, something that was recent in the news. In this case, it was Ukraine right before the invasion of the Crimean Peninsula, because they were under this back and forth cyber hacking with Russia. Ukraine was in the news a lot, so that kind of tied in to make it look more legit. The effect or high benefit, low risk. All you got to do is click this little blue button and reset your password, and you're right as rain, right? Make it real easy. Time is a pressure factor. You got to do this immediately. They used a URL shortener. And so when you clicked the link, you couldn't see where it was really going to take you. It ended up going to an HTTP unsecured web page where they plugged in their old password and their new password. Old password, that's what they were after. Then they used that information, they gained access to those accounts. The kicker is that none of these accounts had two-factor authentication enabled. All right? Simple username and password. That's replayability, easily, taken from them, and then they were in those email accounts. So, that's how easy it could be if you're not careful. All right, we're at the hour mark. Let me wrap up real quick here. You've got homework, plenty of links. I'm going to provide more here for at your library, things that you can do, look at, and think about at work, including FTC-free publications that you can order, printed, and have delivered to your library, the NCSA website, the National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is an excellent program, free resources all around. At home, here's a list of things that you can look at: doing a cybersecurity health check, updating your devices, checking those privacy settings for social media and whatnot, looking at boosting up your login methodologies with MFA or passwords, and then some links to websites that you can go and look at. A list of online resources that may have been mentioned in the presentation is the second to last slide, and finally some books and papers that you may find interesting to read. So that was, wow, 3:01, we got it.
Marathon, you are always awesome, Steve. I have to say, none of us were sleeping, but there is a dog sleeping on a couch watching, so sorry. Hate to burst the
That's
bubble
fine.
there.
Good deal.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I always learn so much, and I always learn things I need to change, but I always get a little validated.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you guys are more than welcome. More than
And this
welcome.
is Patty. I always feel a little guilty about the things that I'm not doing. And then the 2 days after you present, then I'm going to Andy about every 15 minutes going, what do you think I should do about this? So,
Oh man, I just made Andy's world a little bit more exciting, didn't I?
And he knows
I'm
that
sorry,
when
dude. I'm sorry.
he's going to be busy for the next few days.
but as I pointed out in the chat, this is information that you can show a portion of this workshop to a patron or use it as you're training your patrons, because you are the most knowledgeable resource in the community for in a lot of these situations, and you are the educated one, and so you have many opportunities to share this information along.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
Steve, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving so much of your day to us.
No problem. Enjoyed it.
And just to remind you, Ashley, you've got tomorrow. We have Cool Apps, and we will be doing our finale to Tech Week 2025 with Ashley. And Ashley looks like she's got her iPad full of all kinds of things. So make sure you're back with us tomorrow at 1:30 for that. And don't forget to record your attendance through the CKLS CE verification form.